There you go. Hi everyone. Really happy to be live with Heidi Amsinck. I think I've interviewed you for every Jensen book.
You
Jensen?
have actually. Yeah. Yeah. It's tradition now.
Yeah, which is great. Do you want to introduce yourself and your books to anyone who's joining the chat today?
Yes, I'm Heidi Amsinck, and my latest book is this one. It's called Out of the Dark. It's the fourth book in a series about a Copenhagen crime reporter who she has lived abroad for many years, and she returns home to Denmark, and she finds everything a little bit changed in Copenhagen, and that's kind of the start of her sort of crime-solving career, and we followed her through the three previous books as she has established herself over a year, and she has eventually become the chief crime reporter for the newspaper. And in this case, I think I can say that she finds herself pregnant at the beginning of the book, and she is contacted by a witness who says they've seen an assault on a young woman, and no one believes this witness. At the same time, there's a race across Copenhagen to find a missing child. So cases of missing children are incredibly uncommon in Denmark and in Copenhagen police. So I've spoken to very experienced police officers who've never seen it happen. So children who are missing for more than a few hours is something very unusual. So it's just before Christmas, everyone's panicking, and everyone's trying to find this missing child. And at the same time, Jensen begins this other investigation with a witness who says that she's seen something. And eventually those cases turn out to be have some sort of connection between them. I think I can say that. So the principal cast are the same as always. It's Jensen, pronounced in the Danish way with y sound, so Jensen, and her teenage apprentice Gustav, who is the nephew of her editor, and he's a troubled youth, and he's sort of hanging around her, and it gives me an opportunity to tell people about how Jensen works. And the third member of this kind of crime-solving trio is Detective Inspector Henrik Jongersen, whom Jensen has history with. So I'll leave it there. That's the introduction.
It is. I mean, there are some other great characters as well, isn't there? Because we've got like the coffee shop guy who's like one of my favorites.
Yeah, Leon. Yeah.
Sadly, he's not as present in this one.
No, but I can reveal he's coming back. Yeah, I've developed quite a large cast of characters, and I guess they can't all kind of play a big part every time, but Leon is very much still there. So he runs a tiny coffee van, and he sells coffee, but he also does a lot of other things, and he tends to have his eyes and ears open, and he sees a lot of things standing there on the street in Copenhagen, and Jensen kind of bonds with him because she feels a bit like an outsider in Copenhagen. And he is from Jerusalem and has arrived, and he said he followed a Danish woman to Denmark, but I think Jensen is beginning to think, what's going on with this guy? And then in this book, you also meet a sort of an investigator of child sexual abuse material, which is unfortunately something that there's a lot of cases of this all over the world, and it's kind of proliferating, facilitated by the internet. And there are specialist units of the Danish police who work with this. And I've spent some time with one of those units in real life, and I've introduced a character who kind of represents me working with that unit. So he's a specialist in this, and he's been in the police for many years, and the team sort of lean on him to explain, what's happening. We also have a young woman who is vulnerable and has been self-harming and doesn't like, it becomes very nervous about leaving her home, who turns out to be a fantastic hacker, and she is able to find people online that others can't find. and she also comes to the fore in this book.
Yeah, I was going to mention her. I didn't know if we would, because she kind of finds like maybe somewhere she could sort of fit in, doesn't she?
Yeah,
in this book.
Yeah. So we can't sort of quite reveal what has happened, but she feels sort of condemned to kind of living a life in this protected living situation where she feels comfortable, and Jensen and particularly Gustav try to kind of bring her out of that a little bit, and they happen on something that she's incredibly good at, and which gives her confidence, and she finally meets some other people who really understand what it is that she can do. So of course she spent a lot of time by herself sitting in her bedroom, and she's become good at something that the police can really use, which is also not as far-fetched as it sounds, because police do work with hackers, particularly the cybercrime unit of Copenhagen, which is mentioned in this book.
Yeah, I mean, I think you would use anyone's skills to help.
Exactly.
It's quite interesting what you were saying about there not being many missing children.
Yeah, that was interesting to me as well. So I've learned a lot writing this series. So in the first book, there's an episode with a gun, and although Danish police carry guns as opposed to British police, where only special armed units do that, in Denmark it's incredibly uncommon to shoot your weapon. So you can be an entire career in the police and carrying a weapon and never fire it, and never be in a situation where you're about to fire it. So when that happens, it's extremely unusual. In the same way, children don't just go missing from crowded playgrounds in Copenhagen, which is what happens in my book. If they do, they're found quickly. There might be some conflict at home, or there might be a parent who has taken them away or something. And this is not, they immediately establish that's not the case here. So it's something pretty unusual. And because it's so unusual, it sort of reminds the police of or our detective inspector of a previous case where a child also disappeared without trace, which again is so uncommon. It's just not really heard of. And if it does happen, and if they're not found quickly, it's kind of bad news. So that's why everyone is extremely fearful and working very hard to try and find this child.
There's I think this is possibly like your darkest one yet.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is. I think I've taken a few books to kind of find my place with the series, because if I may say that as the author, because of course you think every book you write, you think, I've put everything into it. But I think as you get to know your characters, you become more confident sending them into darker situations, and maybe also speed up the action a little bit and add a little bit more tension. But I should stress that I'm not really someone who spends a lot of time in the mind of the criminal. So it's not particularly explicit. So it's more hinted at. I hope I've tried to kind of treat it sensitively, because I found it really difficult to write about this stuff. But I try not to. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about the perpetrators. I spend a lot of time thinking about how it weighs on the people who are, trying to find out what's going on. If that makes sense.
No, it really does. I wanted to ask you about the other new person we meet in this one. I don't think Heather really gets a name. He's just like the new video guy.
Yeah. So if you've sort of followed the series, you know that Gustav, basically he was expelled from school. His father sent him to his sister, who is the editor of the newspaper that Jensen works for. And because her editor was a bit cross with Jensen, she said, "You look after this young man. I want you to teach him about journalism." And it turned out that he's actually really good at investigating, and the two of them form a bit of a partnership, So now I've done that thing where I've forgotten what you asked me because I've forgotten what I started to tell.
I was asking about the new videographer.
Oh yes, that's right. So Gustav, being 17, he's very good at all things digital. And he's been taking a lot of videos. So whenever they do a story, he'll tend to film stuff. He put Jensen on Twitter. He's really trying to kind of get her out there. And he's so good at this. And Dagbladet, which is the newspaper, is deep in problems. Not making any money. They're losing readers left, right, and center, and they're years behind the other newspapers in Denmark. This is a left-leaning, crisis-stricken newspaper in Copenhagen, and they decide, with the help of some Swedish venture capitalists who buy the newspaper, they decide we need to be more digital. And so they, in a desperate attempt to get the readers back, they hire this new hotshot video editor, and he's quite full of himself. So Jensen immediately she asks him about his work, and he says, I've done amazing things. Google me, he said, and so she calls him Google me from then on. He does have a name, Yannick, his name is, but he's so arrogant and kind of full of himself, and he really wants to work with Jensen, but she doesn't let him in because she's got Gustav, and the two of them kind of enter this warfare, and Google me turns out to be someone slightly different to whom everyone thought.
He does, but I think he was a good new addition in the story.
Yeah, he's I think the power you realize that you have when you're writing a crime novel, and you think, oh, I've created this person, but I don't really like them anymore. You can get rid of them. That's the power that you have. Or you can invent new people, or you can replace people, or bring in new characters. And I think that's often how I work to sort of keep it fresh. I love developing a new character and getting to know them, and also throwing a few curveballs at Jensen and Gustav and Henrik, because they shouldn't have too easy a life, and they need to kind of deal with the competition with other people who are trying to do what they're doing, and so on. So that's how he came about.
Well, they definitely don't have an easy life, do they? And I mean, Jensen's going to find life very hard going forward, I would imagine, to investigate.
Yes. Yeah, she is. I've really created a problem for myself there. So that's the thing. What you do to your permanent characters, if you decide to have a child, something happens to them, you're stuck with that. You need to kind of deal with that in the ensuing books. But I think for Jensen, it's motherhood, which obviously makes the case even more harrowing for her. The fact that she's expecting a child herself makes it absolutely horrendous what she has to go through in this book. But I think that in the long run, it will help her. It will change her. It will give her, it'll shape her, I think, and I think it'll make her kinder. I think it'll take off some of her rougher edges. And it's interesting, she's been sort of pretty fearless, but I think in my experience, having a child is both a slow loss of control over many years, because you can't control the child. They are their own person. But also this new fear that's born in you. Suddenly you're incredibly vulnerable because you're trying to protect this little new life. And that I think is something I thought would be good to throw Jensen into. She's lived a life really of kind of doing what she wants and going where she wanted and not thinking of her own safety. And now suddenly she has to think about herself and another person, because she doesn't have a large family. She has her mother, but she lives far away. So she's kind of on her own. She has to figure this out. And I like to put her through stuff to develop her and see how it changes her character.
I think that was an interesting sideline away from the main story, though, because Jensen isn't who you would think of as like a natural mother, and seems to be approaching like the idea of being pregnant as very like, I just don't want to think about it.
Yeah. So it's all. So I think I can reveal that she's no longer with the father, who is an interesting character in himself, but so she doesn't quite know how it happened. She thought they'd been careful, so it's a huge surprise to her to find out that she's pregnant. So there's that, and then she kind of just goes past the point of no return. She doesn't want to terminate her pregnancy, and she just goes on with it. And then suddenly, she finds herself, it's going to happen. It's going to happen pretty soon, and she's got nowhere to live. Her job is a little bit shaky. And suddenly she thinks, I think slowly over this book, it dawns on her what is about to happen, the enormity of it. And I think, you'll be surprised about her reaction. I think she's trying to push it to one side, pretend that she's not pregnant, but this baby is very much wanting to be born and is very much going to be there in her life, and she has to deal with it, and she has to grow up pretty quickly.
She does, and I think it's kind of nice to sort of read a story with someone who doesn't have everything together about certain things. Do you know what I mean? You kind of feel like it gives her a bit more, makes her more human in a way, doesn't it, when you're reading? Because she is really sort of together when it comes to investigating, and like you said, quite fearless. But then you get this other side of her, and you're like, oh,
that's right. And she now needs to also, she's been kind of rootless. I don't, if in the other books, you'll remember there's this container, it keeps going back and forth over the North Sea with her stuff. And she sends it over, then she sends it back. She never unpacks it. She's not sure she wants to stay. She thinks, I can just leave, at any point I can just leave and go and leave the city and start all over again somewhere else. She's just desperate not to sort of put down roots. But of course, when you have a child, all that changes, especially as the child grows older and they need school and things like that. So I think it's going to be really interesting. But it also means that her relationship with Henrik, who's a former lover, enters a new stage, because the baby is not his, and he has to get over that. And he's immediately thinking, this is over. There's a child between us now. But maybe things aren't that simple, because his feelings, of course, don't change just because she has had a child. So it's a challenge for both of them, I think. Yeah.
True. We've got a couple of hellos on the streams. Donna said she is late because she's been to a staff meeting.
Hello.
This is, I mean, we've talked about this before, but you were a reporter, or have been a reporter. Is that, how much of like your life have you used to influence? Because like Jensen, you've moved.
Yeah, I think that with most authors, we'll probably say the first book is sort of vaguely autobiographical, or you use some of your own, and then that becomes boring very quickly, and you move on and you start making things up. So I thought, for authenticity and to make things easier for myself, I would have a woman who returns from London, where I am and where I have worked for many years as a journalist, and then she's a lot younger than me, but she returns to Copenhagen, and that means that I can, use what I know about journalism and working for a newspaper in Copenhagen. And I've done that. I still have many friends who are journalists, and also I think that journalists have a sort of certain way of looking at the world. In a way, it's not really it's not so much a job. It's kind of a way of relating to the world, of kind of wanting to gather as many facts as you can and then organize them into something that makes sense. I think that's what journalists do, and I think that inherent curiosity just sort of follows you everywhere. So I haven't worked as a journalist now for at least 15 years, and I still think, like one, I still think, oh, wouldn't that be a nice, that would make a nice article, and I can write this. So yes, there is something about looking at the world, but there's nothing really about her apart from the fact that she's a journalist and returns to Copenhagen, where she was born. All that is me, but there's nothing about her otherwise that's like me. We're very, very different. I think she might, she's much more, I'm much more cautious, and I think about things a little bit longer than she does. So yeah, we're different in that way. But I think there is something about starting with something that for confidence, and as you then build up your confidence and you get to know people, you think, why should I just be limited to write about what I know? Actually, I want to learn about this. I want to learn about this. So, and then you start doing your research. So I think this book has come about because I've spent the past sort of 4 or 5 years talking to this team in the Danish police. And I think I said to myself, one day I'm going to write about them. I want to write a tribute to them and what they do to fight this particular kind of crime. What does it feel like? What do they do? What does it look like where they work? All these things I've built up a little bit of knowledge about, just a little bit. So I think start out autobiographical, and then I've moved, and now I just, I feel like I could, just do anything. You have to free up your imagination, I think, if you want to sort of take it further and progress.
I feel like the books as well are always a bit like a love letter to Copenhagen as well, because there's a lot of different areas of the city every time. And
that's very true. And then I tend to go there. I go there a lot, and I spend a lot of time in that area, and I walk the distances between the places where things happen. But I choose often, or in this book, it's very central areas. So there's a beautiful park. So Denmark was a medieval city, and sorry, Copenhagen was a medieval city, and we had for many years, we had the town had ramparts around it and so on. But sort of at the end of the 19th century, they were cancelled. The city were no longer going to use these ramparts. And in one area, they created this enormous park called Ørsteds Park. I don't know if it's that enormous, but it's big for being right in the middle of Copenhagen. And it's an absolutely beautiful park, and it's known for its playgrounds. It's got 3. And then I thought, in a rather sinister way, I thought, why don't we start here? Because it's so extreme that a child could go missing in front of lots of people in a crowded playground. You're just 5 minutes away from one of the busiest metro stations in Copenhagen. So that's one location. The other location is the lakes, which people who've been to Copenhagen may know them. They kind of divide, I suppose, east from west, not quite, but the inner city is kind of bordered on the western side by these lakes, long lakes with bridges going over them, and it's a really, really beautiful area, and it's a place where people come to, run around the lakes, walk with their prams, and there's ducks and swans, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And part of the action takes place there. So again, I'm just spoiling these locations one by one with terrible things happening there. But I think that's the sort of basis of my series, is to take these beautiful picture postcard locations and then imagining sinister things happening behind, the pretty houses and so on. And that's really, what I'm doing. It's also that it's a really small city. I've said that, many times, but it's I think, it's a fraction of the population of it's about 1.2 million people, so it's kind of a fraction of London, and much, much smaller, and you can easily walk it, and people walk it and they cycle it and so on, and that makes it a really tight, nice location to make things happen. You can easily walk from one location to the next, and that makes it really beautiful. But also that I just love the city. I think it has a very sort of idiosyncratic feel. The pace of life is different to London. And that, yes, it's a cliche, but there are a lot of bicycles in Copenhagen. It's a very sort of outdoorsy place, and family-friendly place, I think, comparing to London. So it just gives it a very particular feel that I like to bring out in the novel. So you've got these characters who are fighting crime, but they're living alongside people who seem to have a really happy and well thought out lives and a beautiful welfare society. But just behind it, there's something sinister going on, and that's the tension, I suppose, in the books and they like to play with.
And I think that's the interesting thing about reading books written by people who know a city well, isn't it? You sort of see different aspects of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a huge fan of Ian Rankin's work. I love Inspector Rebus. I've read them all, and I love the way Edinburgh feels in those books. And I think visiting Edinburgh afterwards, you're thinking, oh yeah, and oh yeah, I remember that from that novel and so on. I love that, and I think Edinburgh is obviously a gift because it's so kind of historic and sort of grim looking in places, and it's so evocative, and he really brings that out. And I know you had Ellie Griffiths on recently, and for me, she does the same with Norfolk. I just desperately want to go to Norfolk, to see these places. And she brings something out of the feel of the place, because Ruth Galloway loves the place so much. The same with John Rebus, and you can sort of feel they really love, they're really grounded in the place where they live. I've gone a slightly different way, I suppose, by leaving Jensen feeling sort of slightly out of sorts and like an outsider. She feels she doesn't really belong because the city has changed. And I guess the reason I do that is so that I can tell you who don't know Copenhagen so well, I can point things out to you because she notices them. If she was completely immersed in the place, maybe that wouldn't happen so naturally. And then there's like writing in a foreign language also makes it feel like a little bit of the outsider's perspective, and I quite like to take that. But yeah, and I forgot Donna Leon. I mean, who hasn't wanted to go to Venice after reading? And I just want to sit in the kitchen with Brunetti and his wife as they have a nightcap, and they have something nice for dinner that they've prepared together. And just the way Donna Leon evokes that, and is not even Italian. I know the books aren't translated into Italian, but she makes me feel like I know Venice and I've been there. And I've always been a huge fan of that. So I think whatever I write will probably always be really location focused. It's very much set in Copenhagen.
You do make me want to go back to Copenhagen and do a Jensen kind of walking tour.
How long since you've been?
Oh, it's been a while now. A good few years, I think.
Yeah, you could do a sort of locations that she's used, because a lot of them are very sort of pretty. I haven't done the Little Mermaid yet, but that's because it's probably the least interesting thing about Copenhagen. I would say, give that one a miss, and I'd rather send people down and go to some of the local cafes in Christianshavn, which is an area I really love. Or walking by the canal, or go out sailing on one of the canal boats. That I would rather recommend. But yeah, I ought to just write a quick guidebook to to Copenhagen. With their sort of the favorite places, because I think also Copenhagen is a real sort of foodie city. There's some very, very high-end, very interesting restaurants there, but but even sort of in the cheaper end, you can find all sorts of extremely delicious food there, and they do eat their way around slightly, because I think that's also a way of tasting and feeling that that you were there. And it's very much a sort of cafe place, where people hang out outside. And yeah, so you see a lot of cafes, and in the winter they'll have the fake fires and
And like
blankets
blankets and things. Yeah,
they'll have covered seats, and you can sit there with your blanket and your hot chocolate. I just love that kind of lifestyle.
They had those in Stockholm when we went there as well, like little blankets in the cafes outside. The Little Mermaid was on tour when I went to Copenhagen.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Was being showed elsewhere.
Yeah, she'd gone.
Oh, you didn't miss anything.
But you have a Hans Christian Andersen reference in this book.
Yes, I do. Now remind me. Remind me of my reference.
Someone's name at the end. Well, so we can't really give it away as a spoiler, but someone's name.
Oh no, you can't give it away. No, that. Oh yes, that's very true. Yes, that is very true. There are. So I think we can maybe reveal that there is an appearance of something really truly horrific, the paedophile ring in this in this novel, and they often have really sort of horrible, light-hearted, flippant names, and yeah, we get into some of that naming here. There is a Hans Christian Andersen reference. That's right. I've forgotten about that.
I read it and wondered if you'd done it deliberately. Have a Hans Christian.
Yeah, I guess I had, because also I wanted to. This is a global paedophile ring, but I wanted to sort of signify something with a name that I can't get into either. It's so difficult, isn't it? Because you don't want to sort of spoil people's reading of the book. Yeah.
And when it's book 4, there's like so much in the other books that you can't give away as well.
That's right. And I have to sort of mention it. So, you know, I'd be interested to hear whether you think that you can read, because you've read the others. I don't know, could you read it as a standalone? That is the holy grail, I think, is to write books that you can read in any order. But then that means I have to introduce the characters again and again with each book, because otherwise new readers can't start here.
I feel like you could read it as a standalone. I think your books are best read in order. And I think this one at the very end is one for the fans, because you kind of give us a little bit of a tidbit into things that, like, I finished it, was like, ooh, now I need the next book.
Yes, which is being written at this very moment, Caroline. And yeah, I think I do it to myself as this kind of, come on, write the next one. At the end, I kind of give you a little hint as to what the next one is going to be about. Yeah, I think, I mean, my hope is that, so I'm thinking of Inspector Rebus, because I think they've changed a lot over the series. But I don't know what you think, but I think they've changed a lot. In the beginning, obviously he's aged as well, Rebus, but they feel very different as you sort of read them along. And I think my enjoyment of the last one, number 25, was greater because I'd followed these people all along, and somebody like Siobhan as a character had just developed enormously, and her confidence had developed, and their relationship has changed. They're obviously very fond of each other, but it's sort of changed over the years. And I think it would be amazing if you can do that, if you can still change the series, if people can still read them one by one, because I think it's not realistic. It's sort of unfair to expect people to read like a whole series. I'd rather the books could be enjoyed, one by one. But it's a difficult balance, because I don't want to bore people with too much repetition of what's gone before. So you have to choose carefully, and also you can't give away what just happened in the last book in case people read them out of order. So yeah. I think people with long-running series often have that, because if anything meaningful is going to happen to your characters, they do need to build on previous books, because none of us just start blankly on a new case. We bring baggage with us, we bring previous relationships with us. So that's the problem, I suppose. But I am now toying with an idea for a standalone, because I think with a standalone, you can just let rip. Your choices don't commit you, for the next 10 books. You can just kind of be out. You can create characters and let something completely crazy happen to them. With your long-running characters, you've got to make sure that they live to tell the tale, or that they you can't make too crazy a choice for them, because they have to live with that for the next few books. So I think a standalone would be great. So it feels quite playful to go back to something where you can just invent a new universe and it just lasts for a book. Yeah,
I think what you're saying is true. I think you manage your series in a way very similar to how what I like about the Ellie Griffiths ones. So you kind of tell us a story and wrap it up in the book, but then the characters have their own lives aside from that as well, and they're the little bits that you leave us kind of wanting to know more about, or with a little question about, and that's what will keep you as a fan coming back. But you can kind of read them separately, if you wanted to.
I also think, I mean, someone years ago when I did a creative writing MA, somebody told me that they said you have to find a place to stand. So when you write descriptions, you don't just write it objectively, you write it with all the baggage you've brought to that moment. So it will, you might be reminded of someone you've met in the past, or you might look at something with a certain judgmental attitude because of something that's happened to you before. You're never just coming objectively to a scene. Characters don't do that. But so it is a balance, and it is like being with old friends. When you start writing a new book, I'm writing some scenes here now with Gustav and Jensen, and it's like, oh yeah, I've really missed you. It's so nice to hang out with you again, and let's see, what can happen to you now. But you sort of feel like after 4 books, you're starting to really know them and how they'll react in a certain situation. And also, I think, like them more. I think in the beginning, I didn't really know Jensen well enough. Now I know her, and I think I can see her flaws and I can still like her despite of them. In the beginning, maybe that was harder because I didn't know her. We didn't have kind of previous together. So yeah.
So Donna said she's always. I'm reading you some comments. We got distracted. Donna said she always wanted to go to Copenhagen. She said it's an amazing place, but your chat has really made her want to visit.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
She also said, do you think if you didn't do the job of journalism in the past, you would have ended up writing?
Oh, I think that's such a good question. Do you know what? I think it's difficult for me to separate the two, but you could also, I guess you could ask, does being a journalist help you become a writer somehow? I actually don't really think it does. And if you look at, what professions people come into writing with, I think Abir Mokherjee, for instance, I think he was an accountant, wasn't he? And he always puts an accountant in his books as well. But you can come to writing from any old thing because so journalism, you have the news triangle. You tell the most important thing first, you sum it up, and then gradually you put in the facts so that people can stop at any point down. Fiction is the opposite, and you mustn't tell a story like that. You really, really mustn't. You must hold back. You must mislead people. And so would I still have come to writing? I think I don't know if people can recognize this, but I sort of I felt like books woke me up to the world. When I was a young teenager, I began to read, and I just never stopped. And I am first and foremost, a reader. I love crime fiction, so I read a lot of crime fiction. And I think that's probably what turned me into a writer, actually, more than, being a journalist. But I think it's a really good question. I don't think it helps you. And I think sometimes it can even be a hindrance because you think you can do it, but actually you have to learn it all over again as a new thing.
Yeah. Although, do you have the ability? The only other author I'm thinking of who was a journalist is William Shaw, and apparently he can write anywhere.
Yes, that I can do. I can write anywhere, and in fact, I do. And my books are written. Most of my books, the first four books, were written on holiday. I mean, so this sounds crazy, but I had a full-time job until recently, so that was the only time I could write. And and I'm never bothered by noise, or I don't have to be able to concentrate to write. I put on, I don't know if other people do this, but I put on rain to listen to when I want to concentrate. So some white noise. Also, for some people, it helps them sleep. For me, it helps me focus. So if I'm on a train, writing, I will just put on my rain and then I listen to the rain while I write. So yeah, writing anywhere is something you have to learn as a journalist in a noisy environment, and yeah, for sure.
I work in a noisy environment like all the time. So if I do anything at home where I have to focus, I have to have some other kind of noise on.
I get that.
So
So the TV or the radio or
TV or like something. I won't be watching it, but I just need some.
Yeah, I mean, anything that's remotely like a story, it's a no-no for me. So music, songs with interesting lyrics, forget it. I can't concentrate. That's why I put that stuff on. But I can, I mean, if pressed, I can write. Yeah, I can write anywhere. I don't always. I mean, for me, writing is something that is quite intense, and I'll usually do it in a very compressed period, and then kind of just go for it and not wash my hair in a month and just immerse myself in it. Now that I can do that, it's completely different.
I'm sure I've asked you this before, but do you have an end in mind for the Amsinck books? Do you know how many you're going to write?
So I don't have an end in mind, but I have. So I'm writing number 5. Number 6, I kind of already know what that's going to be about, and I might move them from Copenhagen to where I live now instead, just for a little while. I might move them over here for a bit. So I think I always had in mind sort of around 10 books, but I think you have to see, do people still want to read them? Does the publisher still want to publish them? And just, but I definitely have enough material. There's so many people you're yet to sort of really we don't really know who Liron is, the Israeli. He's clearly got some skills that are quite unusual, but we haven't really seen them yet. So he will need a book. We'll need to sort of delve into that.
We definitely need to know more about him, because you've hinted at him having like an interesting past.
Yeah, he does have a very interesting past, a difficult but interesting past, and then of course there's the ending to this book where you suddenly hear about a person you've never heard about who's quite important, and they must have a book. So yeah, I mean, goodness me, you just feel like it can just sort of go on and on and on. I've got so many ideas for them, and in a way I don't want it to end, because I don't want to not spend time with them. So even when I'm talking about writing a standalone, I also thought about a new series, and maybe one day writing something that happens in the UK, although Danish is sort of my thing. But I still want to go back to Jensen, because that's kind of comfort and home, and I'm only just getting started, So
I may have mentioned this before as well. I can't remember because we've done so many chats. But spin-off stories on like, because the young girl in this, I would read stories of her working with the police.
Yeah.
Stories, if you know what I mean. I would quite happily go down a whole.
I can reveal that she because she is working with the police. I can reveal you'll hear more about her in the next book, because I really like her. I think she's got so much to offer, and she's an unusual person. She's so gentle. She moves almost silently across a room. She doesn't demand people's attention, but quietly she's quite deadly. She's able to do some stuff that is really important, but she does it all from behind a screen. She doesn't like the physical kind of, or being out amongst people. And I really want to spend some more time with her. So and there's also, I mean, Gustav is, he's troubled. He was bullied. Something awful happened. He's shown that he's got a core of steel. That boy. So I would like to, spend some more time with him as well. So I did create a bit of a spin-off last year when I wrote a little mini series for Radio 4 about Jensen and Gustav, and they were doing a sort of paranormal investigation, and that was really fun as well. Because they didn't really, were doing this paranormal investigation, but didn't really believe in it. But then, during the investigation, they kind of had cause to rethink, maybe there is something about this. And I thought that was quite fun as well. Yeah.
Donna says, have you ever given your series characters a quirk, mannerism, or hobby that you've later regretted?
Yeah, I think, let me think. I think it was more that there were some things about Jensen's personality in the beginning that I didn't really like. I didn't really think she was kind enough. And so I've changed her in a subtle way. But I did regret, whilst writing the last one, making her pregnant, and now writing number 5, she literally has a baby strapped to her chest. She's running around with her baby in a sling or in a pram. She's got a baby along with her. So then you have to work out what to do with that. But then you learn that actually it's quite nice to create constraints like that, because you've got to puzzle your way out of them. What does she do with a baby, and who looks after it? And you can't just, a newborn baby, you can't just, leave to any, if you're still feeding, you can't do that. So how do you get around these things? So I think it just gives a nice challenge. But I do appreciate your question. And I think the reason you couldn't really picture Jensen so well, maybe in my first novel, was that I was really conscious that I had to really think about every choice that I made. Jensen she's a very small, slight woman. She's not a big kind of, she's not particularly pretty. She's got a sort of unusual face and so on. That's how I think about her, and I've never regretted that. I've never regretted how I've sort of created her, but I think I'm so aware of the possibility of regret later on. So you have to think about that. But at the moment, I'm trying to look at the glass half full situation and embrace the choices I make, and just try and work with them.
Because you will have eagle-eyed readers who will be like, you can't leave the baby unattended. You left the baby in like page 50.
Yes. Yeah, I can't. I was. Yeah, that's very, very true. But I now get somebody in Denmark to read my books before I publish them, because they do things differently there. So if you work in the public sector, you will never work up till your last day before having a baby. They just don't do that. They go off on maternity leave no later than 28 days before their due date. So I didn't know that. So there's another pregnant character in this book, and that wasn't possible. So I learned that people are incredibly observant. People read things so well. And you sometimes, as the writer, you can't see those mistakes yourself. So you've got to get somebody to read. Or people will say, "Hang on, you could walk that distance in 5 minutes, but you've got them driving it, and they're talking for at least 15 minutes. That doesn't work." So you really, and when you get facts like that wrong, people turn off. And, it becomes not quite right. So little things like that are really important.
I mean, I suppose you have some joy over here with not many people will necessarily be that familiar with the Copenhagen. Yeah,
so that they won't catch me out, you mean?
Well, they might not know as much that you can't do that journey in like 5 minutes, or
But then I've got, as a surprise to me, that the Danish readers really like this series. It's really popular, and they read it, and and
they will catch you out.
They will catch me out. They will catch me out. And the translator is also being watched, because I write in English, so it's translated by a wonderful woman called Anna Mathisen. And she has to think about it as well. How do I translate this? Is this so? I mean, that's the beauty of working, with someone who translates into your own language, that I can check it myself. But I don't know. I don't know how young people speak to each other anymore. I haven't lived there for years. So all these things are really important. I try and really respect it and ask people for advice, ask people to help me, because I want it to be authentic, without overloading it with detail, because then it sort of stops the plot. But I do want it to be real. Yeah. But I also want to point out the stuff that you would notice if you went to Copenhagen. You notice the blankets. You might as well have blankets over here, but they don't for some reason. I think maybe some places do now, but I think it's a very practical thing to, if you have a pavement restaurant and people are sitting out in October, you want a blanket for your legs.
You do it. It's a really nice idea, and it's like quite lovely. I wanted to ask you about the incredible crime writing festival you went to.
Yes, is that the Danish one or the one in Aberystwyth that I've just come back from?
Well, both. Tell us about both.
So the Denmark has a crime festival that is taking place in a former prison. It's a state prison. It's up on a hill in a town called Horsens, and it's proper, yard, and the tower, it's a proper prison, and you go in there and they've transformed it into these spaces where crime writers now come and meet their audiences. I think you can even stay overnight in a prison cell. But it's really popular. It's and they have a lot of Eddie Griffith was there. They have a lot of writers from over here. I think Neil Lancaster was there last time. Chris Carter is almost always there. Massive superstar over there. So that there's crime readers are huge in number over there, and so we write it. We write like the sort of Nordic noir, but people also really love it. It's a big there's a big community of people who read and write crime. So yeah, I just enjoy going home to that. And every time I go home, I'll meet people I was at school with or something like that. It's that kind of place, So that's pretty special. It's called Krimimessen. And this weekend I went to Aberystwyth in Wales for the Crime Cymru festival. I don't know, I'm not saying that right, but I met a lot of the kind of Welsh crime writers. You've probably had Claire McIntosh and people like that on here. Yeah, it was really special actually meeting people in a sort of different region and learning a few words of Welsh as well, because they do have, everything is bilingual. So I did a lot of the event in Welsh.
Wow.
That was new for me.
And then tell us what you've read recently and really enjoyed.
So I recently read. So I'm reading. Do you know The Chestnut Man, the Danish novel? By Smystrup, yeah, who wrote the script for The Killing, and is an incredible writer. He has just put out a new book that I think is coming over here as well. And again, The Chestnut Man was based on a sort of children's game, and this one is also based a little bit on a children's game, which is really, really sinister. It is incredible. So it's called Count to One, Count to Two. I don't know what it's going to be called in English, but that was incredible. The Frozen People, I really love. I think Ellie Griffiths is amazing, that she can create some completely new characters, really fully formed. I really like Ellie, the character. I think the idea is brilliant. It slightly made my head spin, what's happened? Oh, they went back and now but I loved it. I think it's a really, really good series. And what else am I reading? I'm reading a lot of Danish writers at the moment, and not all of them are translated into English yet. But the latest book I've got is a book by Lone Tiles, who you might have seen on TV over here. She has a series called Fatal Crossing. It was a new sort of Scandi noir series. Very, very good. That was her first book, and I know that they're filming her second book now. And she just had her her 7th book in her series out, and I was reading that, so that's also very, very good. Yeah, there's so many, Caroline. I don't even know where to start. I barely read anything else at the moment. I just read. I also there's a Danish author called Dorte Norse. She has been, I think she was once nominated for the International Booker, and she's been nominated for various prizes. And she's written a book about a woman who lives, a scientist who lives alone in North Jutland and studies the universe and the stars and the beginning of the universe. I hope that's going to come in English at some point. So that's the advantage of being able to read in 2 languages. We have some amazing books out now. And for people who, I haven't read it yet, but for people who like the Department Q series by Jussi Adler-Olsen, the Danish author, they've also been filmed a number of times. And they've just brought out a number 11. So he has passed on the baton for Department Q to 2 female writers, crime writers whom I know very well, Stine Bolter and Line Holm, and they're going to continue that series a little bit like Karen Smirnov has taken on the Stieg Larsson empire. So that series is continuing, and I'm pretty sure it's going to come out in English as well. I don't know if people know the Department Q series, but it's basically a sort of cold cases unit in Copenhagen, and they're very, very good. Yeah, they're very sort of almost sort of Joe Nesbo level of kind of scariness as well. So lots of good stuff coming over from Scandinavia.
So handy being able to read in multiple languages.
Yeah, I know, it's brilliant. Yeah, and I have the streaming service as well. So because I've got a Danish book, an English book, and then I read a physical book, which will either be in Danish or English. But I've always got 3 books on the go, which I really love. So yeah,
I like it. I'm a multiple books at one go kind
of. Oh, you are.
Yeah,
I'm not the only one.
Yeah, it's because at least 2.
Yeah, because when I walk or take the tube, that's different. I don't want to carry a big thick book with me, but I always read at night before sleeping. I'll always read for half an hour just to sort of switch my brain off. And I think in the old days I couldn't really read and write at the same time. I would only write things, but I feel it keeps it just keeps me interested, and I love the story. I love the narrative, the storytelling, and there are some amazing, writers out there whom I just love. And if I find someone I love, I'll read anything by Søren Sveistrup now. After The Chestnut Man, I'll read anything, and they are absolutely brilliant. He's just a master of tension and scariness. So yeah.
I feel like you discover an author you like, you want to read everything they've ever written.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like Kate Atkinson. I've read everything. I'll read anything that, I don't care. Rose Tremaine is the same. I love. I know Rose Tremaine is not crime, but and Kate Atkinson is not really. She's not really a conventional crime writer, but I just love her Jackson Brodie novels. I think they're brilliant. I think she's such a master of characterization, and I also want to read Chris Brookmyre's latest. Is it The Shattered Mirror? Or help me out, someone. But I think that was nominated for an award. I really like his writing as well. So little time and so many books to read.
You're on my must-buy list as well. Like someone I read every book of.
Thank you.
Finish our chat off because we've got about a minute left with telling people what they're going to go away and buy.
What you should buy right now. Well, if you haven't read The Frozen People, I would probably recommend that. I think it's true innovation.
I know. Book.
Oh, mine.
I mean, also,
my book.
Yeah, remind people about your books that they're going to go
Please go and buy this one, Out of the Dark. I've had some really lovely reviews for this one. I wasn't really expected it. Sunday Times pointed it out as a book of the month, which I was so chuffed with. I just couldn't believe it. But yeah, they seem to like the series. So it's the fourth series in the Jensen, fourth book in the Jensen series. But I actually think you could just start here if you wanted to. I don't think you have to go back and read all four. So yeah, please. And then tell me what you think. I really love when people leave reviews. So
it's really good.
And then also buy the present people.
Yeah, and that too. But yeah, and then all that's left for me to say is thanks for joining us again.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Maybe we'll meet again sometime.
Jensen 5.
Next year, maybe. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me.